Tonight, a big intervention from the Secretary of State, Hilary Benn.
A lack of funding is not the impediment to public services transformation. The real impediment has been the failure to reform the system.
So is that a line in the sand from Westminster? Not surprisingly, it went down like a lead balloon in Belfast.
This government needs to recognise that you cannot continue to provide the same level of public services at the same time as transforming those services with the same financial envelope.
It's not just the Secretary of State's job to whiz into town and commentate on politics here at the Assembly or to pick up a crisis after the Assembly has collapsed. He is an active participant.
I find his comments arrogant, and I think they show disregard for our communities and our democratically elected politicians.
But what will it mean if the Labour government sticks to its position? I'll be talking about that to my political guests, and we'll have reaction and analysis from two observers with insights into Stormont and Downing Street. Hello, money from London can dominate politics here. This week, the Secretary of State made his move, reminding politicians they've just had the largest settlement in the history of devolution and should now sort out the health service. A health service he claimed it's been damaged by politicians here not doing enough to reform it. As we've just seen, there's a lot of anger at Hilary Benn's approach, and that's what I'll be discussing tonight with my studio guests. The analysis will come later, but first let's hear from the politicians. I'm joined by the SDLP leader Claire Hanna and the Ulster Unionist Party's deputy leader Robbie Butler. We're also joined by the Alliance Party MP Saoirse Eastwood and by the Sinn Féin MP Chris Hazzard. We did ask the DUP to take part in the conversation, but as you can see, there's no one here. So thank you to all of you for joining me in the studio tonight. Chris Hazzard, first of all, were you surprised by the Secretary of State's comments on Monday?
Well, I think like many people, I come away reflecting on it, that it was a very partisan and at times very pompous speech from the Secretary of State.
Pompous?
I think he showed a complete disregard for many families, workers in our local communities, people who he allegedly is supposed to represent around a cabinet table in London, but he has completely disregarded their interests. He's completely disregarded the role of locally elected representatives and the fact that the executive have set themselves the task of transforming and reforming our public services and are doing so at the time on the back of 14 years of Tory austerity whilst negotiating with the British Treasury, who, let's remember, last year acknowledged that there has been serious underfunding in Stormont and the Stormont requires more money. So for Hilary Benn...
Some people would say, with the greatest respect, Hilary Benn is probably the least pompous Secretary of State we've had in a very long time. That wouldn't necessarily be the adjective that a lot of people would grasp for. And when he was speaking in the way that he spoke about the health service, for example, surely he was speaking for the citizens of Northern Ireland and on behalf of the patients who are dealing with the crisis in care that they're dealing with.
Well, that would be the case if nobody had acknowledged previously that there needs to be reform. I don't think any of the executive parties or ministers around that table, to be fair to them, have said that there's no need for reform. You know, we've had 14 years of Tory Secretaries of State jetting into Belfast, you know, providing condescension, arrogance, statements that just simply do not relate or are reflective of the situation here, and then jetting back to London. We got more of that this week. It appears that the only thing that Hilary Benn did achieve this week was to finally get rid of any sort of idea that we're going to see a step change when a Labour government. We're not going to. We might have a change of tie, but we don't have a change in policy.
Yeah, I suppose some people might have expected someone in Sinn Féin like yourself to say that about previous Conservative Secretaries of State, but not a Labour Secretary of State, not someone who was part of the setup that brought an extra £1.5 billion into Northern Ireland last autumn.
Well, Hilary Benn's a representative of the British government, a British government at the minute that is faltering on a number of fronts. Let's not forget about that, and is lurching to the right to try and fight with Farage. And I think what Hilary Benn needs to do is actually work more constructively with the local executive and engage in a negotiating with the British Treasury. And I make the point again, the British Treasury last year acknowledged that Stormont has been underfunded. Those negotiations are underway. And to be fair to Keith Archibald, as the former Minister of Finance and the Executive, they're set set to balance the budget this year. They've raised an additional £129 million in revenue over this 2-year periods. All the while, they're setting themselves the task of reforming public services. After 14 years of austerity, that's not going to be done overnight, but most importantly, it requires investment. Stormont is a regional administration. It requires investment, serious investment from the British Exchequer, or else it's going to be very, very difficult indeed to achieve.
Yeah, OK, well, Hilary Benn made the point that he believes the investment is there and the £1.5 billion extra money that came to Northern Ireland is part of that. Saoirse Eastwood, Chris Hazard called the comments pompous. Kiva Archibald, his party colleague, called them arrogant. How would you describe the contribution from the Secretary of State on Monday?
I suppose, Mark, it felt like a little bit of chastisement. What I would say in response to that is that they will throw out that they have given a generous settlement, but we know that there has been an acknowledgement that Northern Ireland has not been funded at need. And at the same time, those negotiations with the Treasury are still ongoing. As Chris has said, everybody knows that. So we are in a position where we do have an executive, where we do have ministers around the table who want to deliver for everybody in Northern Ireland. Our position is, as a party, we are very much in support of reform of the institutions. I said yesterday at Prime Minister's Questions, you can't turn around and tell us that we don't know how to spend our money, that we have these decisions racking up, which we do, and then do absolutely nothing to curb and stop the cycles of collapse.
But in terms of fiscal headroom, in terms of funding at need, we're now at 124%. We're talking about 127. That conversation is happening. Hilary Benn clearly wasn't flying a kite on Monday. You must have been aware of this because you sit on the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, and his Northern Ireland office colleague Fleur Anderson last month pretty much said the same thing to that committee. To both of you, Claire and Saoirse, who were sitting there, clearly a settled position on the part of the NIO. Could quote a lot of what Fleur Anderson said, but we haven't got time, but it effectively boils down to, look, we know it's not going to be easy, but we believe it's doable. Now is the time to get on with it.
And what I would say in response to that is no member of the public in Northern Ireland, nationalist, unionist or other like myself, is going to turn around and deny that we need to get on with reforming our public services, which are on the floor. But we're not going to be able to do it at a time whenever we haven't actually got a backup of yearage of that need that we have.
What does that mean, a backup of yearage?
So basically, we need this backdated, and it hasn't been. So what we need is an acknowledgement from the government that we can't at the same time provide public services and transform them at the same time. You need money to do that.
But that is a conversation. That is a conversation that's ongoing. It was also a point made by the DUP leader, Gavin Robinson.
What I would say is that there needs to be conditionality. It can't just be extra money, throwing good money after bad into a system that doesn't work, like Take Health, for example. We know that we need reform of our health service. That isn't going to be done just throwing good money after bad. The system needs reformed. What we need to do is to keep the show on the road, but do that reform at the same time. We're not going to be able to do that with the envelope that we have. And frankly, it's disingenuous from the Secretary of State and anybody else in NIO to suggest otherwise.
But to be clear, Fleur Anderson said she knows that it's not going to be easy, but the process has to be started. I mean, are we looking at a staring contest here between politicians in London and Belfast? Is that where this leads?
I don't think we are at all. I think what we're looking at is actually, we are the people from Northern Ireland. We have a democratic mandate and we know what people are saying. And what they're saying is get on and do the job of work that you're elected to do, whether it's at Stormont or at Westminster. And we know anywhere in the UK or in the south of Ireland that these sorts of massive public service transformations require additional funds. We simply cannot provide the services that people of Northern Ireland need at the same time as being told, right, OK, cut the cloth to suit. Yeah. That isn't how it works.
But you also can't do nothing. You also can't begin the process. You can't not begin the process of transformation. Otherwise, we go backwards. We're already going backwards. You're just going to accelerate that if you don't begin to engage with what transformation actually means.
I absolutely agree, and the people out there will agree also. But what I would say, Mark, is that we need to do reform of our institutions as well. We can't simply walk into this expecting
and Hilary Benn knocked that back. He doesn't seem to be interested in that. Well, he can knock it back
for as long as he likes because we'll keep batting it out there. And you know what? Not because it's a personal pet project of ours as a party, but because that's what the people of Northern Ireland need. Okay. I'm not prepared prepared to roll the dice again, and neither should he be, frankly, and that's why reform needs to happen.
OK, Robbie Butler, you're the MLA at the table tonight, so you know about the inner workings of Stormont. You're the deputy leader of a party which is led by Mike Nesbitt, who is, of course, the health minister. If this does develop into a staring contest between Stormont and Westminster, what happens to the health service, which is already crumbling?
Well, it is crumbling, but under both Robin Swan's stewardship and Mike's, there is already transformation underway and money has been saved. But the reality is, and I think the Secretary of State, and I've said this before, was about a metre high and a mile wide in his statement, because what he didn't actually recognise and what he should have done was stated the very fact that we had 5 years without a government, without leadership across all of our departments.
Well, I think he did acknowledge that.
I don't think he did, because we all focus in on the money piece, and whilst there is more money there, what we will remind him of is with the last Secretary of State, there was also a promise to go to the Treasury and knock for more, because there was a recognition that to get real transformation, the first thing that needed to happen was stabilisation of the services. Because as you said, a lot of the services, particularly in health, are on their knees, and before they can be fixed, they need to be stabilised. And as the lead party in that, we are making inroads. There's absolutely no doubt that some of the initiatives that have taken place in elective care, for instance, stabilisation reform and better delivery, Mike's tilt left to look at social care reform and more GPs and training is going to make a difference. It's going to take some time.
Surely you've just defeated your own argument by beginning your comments by saying Mike Nesbitt's already beginning the process of delivering transformation.
Absolutely.
So if he is, okay, then Hilary Benn is right. It can be done. So
you have to try and improve your services as you're going. But for instance, we bid for £135 million in the executive to tackle waiting times. We didn't get that. We bid for money to reopen the cross-border reimbursement scheme, which was actually actively improving people's outcomes, because they were able to get operations through consultants in the south. That wasn't met, and these are additional pieces of money that need to be found. However, we are in the business of serious and credible government here. We don't have that because of the repeated times that Stormont has been brought down by the DUP and Sinn Féin. So we're a party of serious politics, and we won't be found wanting in our responsibilities.
OK, Claire Hanna, you're the leader of party which is the main party of opposition at Stormont. This is a complex issue, undoubtedly so. Do you believe that the funding is there already in the hands of the relevant executive ministers at Stormont to be able to get on ahead with transformation, as Hilary Benn and Fleur Anderson say is the case?
The first thing I say is I'm no surprise at all that the UK government isn't, buzzing to spend loads of money in Northern Ireland. That's not a surprise to me, and it's one of the reasons my party want a different constitutional future, so that we aren't stuck in this sort of relationship. There's a lot of focus on the messenger, but it is something I hear from people every day, that it is time to get on with it. There's no doubt. And
you put out a statement to that effect, because you actually said, you talked about the Secretary of State's comments perhaps having struck a nerve with our politicians.
And I also said when I took over as SDLP leader in October, yes, there are absolutely failures and flaws in funding, but there are also failures in leadership and in imagination. And the executive, they don't. I'm not saying that they have limitless money and limitless power, but they do have power. They do have a larger budget than they've had before, and they do crucially have some time. And it is time to get on with it. And all of this, if we put everything down to the Brits, then we are disempowering ourselves, and we're disempowering people.
So, well, just to be absolutely clear, I just want to be clear for the benefit of people watching this. You said in your statement, released in response to what the Secretary of State said, that the executive can't hide from their failure to reform public services. And then your final statement, passing the buck won't make these problems go away. Rather than directing their ire at the Secretary of State, executive parties, that's these parties and the DUP, which isn't here, would be better off getting on with addressing the valid points he has raised. So you back Hilary Benn's assessment?
Very clearly, there are valid points that reform is needed. And we know that less than half of 1% of the budget has been allocated to transformation. There's money sitting in a transformation fund unspent. This year, with the money and with the additional resources, we're building 400 social homes, 80% below their own budget. There's no reoffending strategy. ideology to address the fact that a fifth of prisoners will be back within a year. There's no plan for water. We have a very ideological approach to education and a very unsettled workforce. We do, and others have raised the issue of reform, which is one we have tried to practically move, not just talk about it. Thanks to an SDLP proposal yesterday, there is perhaps going to be a little bit of reform within the Assembly. So nobody has ever said, and the SDLP will take every single opportunity to fight for the fairest and the largest possible funding settlement. But we can't just curse the darkness. You have to start lighting some candles and getting on with using the power. And by the way, it's not like people were plucked from random. People sought power. They went out to the electorate and said, I will fix these problems. So you do have to get stuck in with the tools that you have.
So, Saoirse Eastwood, you sit in the House of Commons chamber with Claire Hanna. You sit in the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee alongside Claire Hanna, and she takes a very different view of what Hilary Benn has said from your party's position and from other executive parties and their positions. How do you respond to what she's just said? The resources are effective. It's complex. She says it's complex, but the resources are there
and Mark,
to
be very
get
clear,
on with it.
I haven't said that the money is limitless at all,
No.
but we can't just say that they're not funding us and not.
But you have said that Hilary Benn has struck a nerve. That's what you've said. So how do you respond to that?
You can see he struck a nerve.
I'm surprised. Normally, parties here are very much singing from the same song sheet to acknowledge that we don't have everything we need. And I think it's important to be united in that regard. What I would also say is that actually the two ministries that we hold around the executive table, Agriculture and Justice, have put forward very substantive pieces of legislation. And also we do have a bit into the Transformation Fund, which is really important to note. And absolutely, it isn't about cursing the darkness. It is about being in government and delivering for people, because that's what we were elected to do.
But Claire Hanna says executive parties can't hide from their failure to reform public services. Is that what you're doing?
And I think, there's obviously a huge gulf of difference there. Governing is difficult and governing is hard, and it does require a special effort in Northern Ireland because of the sort of system that we have. But I think every person around that executive table, Mark, understands that actually there is a level of unmet need that has not been secured yet. As I say, we're in negotiations with the Treasury to make that happen. There is the Transformation Fund. More people do need to bid into that. And the people of Northern Ireland actually want to see us getting on and governing. They don't want collapse. I want to make sure that actually we have reform of the institutions, and actually it was Alliance and SDLP that did that at the AERC committee together. Obviously it's been a very long-term alliance ask for the last 20 years, and we'll gladly work with anybody to make that a reality, because it's the best outcome for people in Northern Ireland.
So here is the question Chris Hazard. What happens next if it turns into a staring contest? Because Hilary Benn has already said this is the biggest settlement in the history of devolution. He has pointed out, and others have pointed out, that Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, isn't having everything her own way at the moment in terms of growth in the UK economy, in terms of the fiscal headroom that she thought she was going to have and doesn't now appear to have. If this is the bottom line, as Fleur Anderson and Hilary Benn have said, there is no more coming. You have more than enough resources at your disposal to deliver the transformation that is necessary to improve public services. What happens then?
Well, I think there's a couple of key points here. And first of all, given that Claire sits on the government benches alongside Labour, it's not surprising that she's trying to have her cake and eat it here. Let's be very clear. These difficult decisions that the Secretary of State is talking about is rampant austerity. We've seen 14 years of it. Councils in Britain are on the verge of bankruptcy. Public services are on collapse. Look at the water, look at the transport system. That's what the Secretary of State wants from here.
OK, so my question is, people may or may not agree with your analysis, but my question is the same.
But what the executive parties
whether
have
you're right or whether you're wrong, here's my question, Chris. What happens next?
So what the executive parties have said is, it's undoubtable that there needs to be reform and transformation of our services.
So get on with it.
But you have to invest in it to make it possible. You have to invest in it. And the British Treasury last year acknowledged Stormont has been underfunded. You meet funding need for 1 year, but for decades before, Stormont has been underfunded. There needs to be a cycle of investment. Sorka has touched on it now. There needs to be a ramping up over the next number of years to allow the Stormont
part of the problem surely is that we're dealing with the legacy of bad decision making in the past. We're also dealing with a legacy of politicians running away from their responsibilities and pulling Stormont down.
But we need decent public services. We need fair terms and conditions for our public workers. Otherwise, you're going to see rampant industrial action. Claire, no doubt, will be back supporting fair investment at that point. But this is where you need fair investment.
You can't just kick the can down the road again.
I just made the point to you. Stormont's balancing its budget this year. It's going to raise over 100 million in additional revenue this year, and the executive have begun the process of transformation and health in other places. There's many miles to go on this road, but you have to invest in it. We don't have an exchequer in Belfast. We require the Secretary of State to get on side with the executive and to make the case to the Treasury to say, if you want to do this right, if you want to make sure this is sustainable and protect the living conditions of people here in the north of Ireland, then you have to invest in it.
OK, Claire, you wanted to come in again?
Well, it's trying to put it all on to the fact nobody is saying, and we've said very, very clearly and taken every opportunity in Stormont and in Westminster, fight for every single penny we can possibly get. And everybody knows that Rome wasn't built in a day. But as I've outlined, and we've outlined over the last year, the foundations aren't even being built. There is an additional resource. We know that there are inescapable pressures, but that amount is not being allocated to transformation. A transformation fund that was set up is not even being fully utilised by the executive. Those are just facts. It can both be true that we need and should get more money, and also be true that the executive aren't getting on with effectively and efficiently spending the money that they have.
Do you take some comfort, Robbie Butler, in the comments of the Secretary of State, Hilary Benn, when he seemed to be effectively backing your Health Minister, Mike Nesbitt, and saying that he understands that transformation is necessary and he is attempting to push ahead with that?
Well, I think to go back to Chris's first comments when he said that the Secretary of State was pompous, I think that Hilary Benn is probably the most articulate, knowledgeable and interested Northern Ireland Secretary of State.
Do you think he's pompous? Do you think he's arrogant?
Absolutely. I don't actually know. I find him very engaging. What I do think is that we don't have credibility as a government here in Northern Ireland. So in any discussion that the Secretary of State's going to have with the Treasury in terms of future funding for Northern Ireland, we're going to have to demonstrate credibility through stability. And I know there's been calls on the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister to vocally guarantee that they won't bring Stormont down in this mandate and commit to that in the future. And unfortunately, neither of them have taken that opportunity when it's been fed out to them. And I think if we are going to work with our Secretary of State and get him to champion Northern Ireland at Treasury, which is his job, by the way, we're going to have to demonstrate that we have the credibility, the political nous, and gain his trust in the fact that transformation can happen alongside improving people's lives, which is the goal for each of us here.
I think the DUP have made it very clear under Gavin Robinson that they have no intention of pulling Stormont down again. He's made that point very clear, and I think you've no intention of putting Stormont down at the moment, have you? Herring. Yeah. Okay. So, question to you.
Then they should reform it, by the way. Then they should commit to advancing the reforms that mean that gun is not on the table. And I'm really glad, because I hadn't heard that from both parties, that they commit to not bring it down in this mandate. But let's fix the standing orders to make sure that threat doesn't hang over things. Yeah, well, it's interesting that Hilary Benn didn't seem to want to go down that road in particular. I just wonder how he will respond. Robbie Butler, to comments that Mike Nesbitt made when he said, I'm old enough to remember a Labour Prime Minister who accused the whole population of Northern Ireland of being spongers. I mean, why reheat that hoary old chestnut in a situation like this? I mean, that's over 40 years ago.
Well, I think he's just illustrating the point that when people are commenting on the Northern Ireland situation, you're better coming at it from a position of knowledge. And I think Hilary Benn actually does that and has engaged in a way that is probably unrepresentative of former Secretary of State. But
so hang on now. If that's the case, then Mike Nesbitt's comments were ill-judged. Were they not?
I've also worked operationally as a firefighter under a Labour government when actually there wasn't enough money to put diesel in the fire engines in Northern Ireland. So when we're talking about the impact on people's lives, we're the representatives of those people. We will react. And we will, we bear those scars too. We've worked under those pressures. So we represent the people of Northern Ireland, not the people of any other constituency.
Mike Nesbitt went on to say, I'm asking to meet the Secretary of State because I want to say to him respectfully, please go down, don't go down that route. And then he added, that kind of language, Mr. Benn's language, does not help collaborative working. Did he misspeak?
No, I don't think so. I think
well, it seems to be a very different approach from the approach you're just taking tonight.
No, I think if you take everything that Mike has said,
I've just read the whole quote.
His first paragraph actually was probably quite warm towards Hilary Benn in terms of the statement. But we have to point out the glaring facts and omissions from the Secretary of State's speech this week, which actually didn't help things.
Yeah, I want to go back, Claire Hanna, to the committee. Another issue that was raised in that, and it was asked by a number of those present, and that was about the government's position on the additional costs for organisations, given the changes to employers' national insurance contributions. They go up, and that will have an impact in the private sector and in the public sector. Huge impact, potentially. Gavin Robinson raised that matter directly with Fleur Anderson. You raised the challenges faced specifically by the voluntary sector. You got a bit of empathy. You didn't get much else.
Yeah, and by the way, one of the jobs I have in Westminster and take very, very seriously is to try and interpret and articulate particularly the additional challenges here, including over the last mandate, why we do need an additional funding formula, and you know, there's always a lot of comments. Some days that, you know, I'm a pointless lickspittle, and some days it's my fault because I don't sit beside Nigel Farage, as if that would solve all of the challenges. But no, clearly that is going to be a pressure. There's going to be Barnett consequentials. We haven't had the exact amount of that worked through. Clearly money is being given to councils in England to mitigate that cost. That is absolutely a pressure, and one that we do need to keep pressing for. Ultimately, as I say, those will work through. At the moment, they're being passed on to councils, as far as I can tell. But it is worth saying, I mean, the former Finance Minister, Keeve Archibald, her top budget official, said that this is the biggest settlement they've ever had. And I pointed out again, a tiny fraction of that is being spent on investment. And of course, it is difficult to double run, but you do have to start somewhere. And I don't think we've seen that in the draft budget. We haven't seen it in the draft PFG, which is still, as I say, sitting in draft after all these months.
But do you think you've maybe misjudged things? Because your colleague Colm Eastwood, I think he was talking in the run-up to the last election, talked about the very significant influence, the strong influence, I think is the phrase he used, that your party has with the British Labour Party. He said if a Labour government was elected last July, that would be good for community organisations, good for people in Northern Ireland. That optimism seems now to have been badly misplaced.
I think everybody is disappointed in the economy. It is, and I'm not here, by the way. I speak for the SDLP. I don't speak for the Labour Party. But it is fair to say that the last budget, and it is hard. People aren't feeling it. And certainly not here when it's not reaching through. There was loosening of 40 billion. There is 40 billion extra in public services than there would have been under the Conservative.
Okay,
politics,
just quickly.
Politics is fundamentally about choices. If you don't have this government, you have the last lot, and I don't think that worked. And politics is about choices here. We know there aren't limited resources, and we're not nitpicking at executive parties for the things they're doing, but we are going to call them out on the things that they're not doing.
Okay, if you've got to go back in, just briefly, we're nearly out of time, we have 30 seconds here. You've got to go back into negotiations with the Treasury, I suppose, slash the Secretary of State, Hilary Benn. You've got to try to get whatever deal you can get. If your party is calling his comments arrogant and pompous, that doesn't help the mood music, does it?
Well, it's not about the mood music, it's about delivery. And at the end of the day, as Claire's alluded to there, it's about political choices. So there's a loosening of £40 billion. You know, there's money available here. It's about making sure if his Secretary of State is making the case for the people he's allegedly supposed to represent.
Okay.
And of course he doesn't. And that's the point here. Locally democratic representatives around that executive table are getting on with the job of transformation. They need the Secretary of State on the same page as them.
Does it help the mood music, Saoirse Eastwood, if the Secretary of State knows that tonight you have said his comments felt a bit like a chastisement?
I think it's just a bit of good old Northern Ireland honesty, and he's going to have to get used to that. And I think he needs to understand that what we're saying is in the best interests of working collegiately along with him and the new UK government. I think they need to understand that actually we are desperate to do the job of transformation of public services and reform of the institutions, so we don't have this cycle of collapses again, which actually Hilary himself said he wanted to end. So it's time for them also to put their money where their mouth is, and I'll be holding their feet to the fire in that regard.
OK. Next time I get a chance, I'll ask the Secretary of State what he thinks of your dose of good old Northern Ireland honesty. It'll be very interesting to hear what he has to say about that.
He's in Lagan Valley quite often, actually.
OK,
so
well, you can ask him yourself. Thank you all very much indeed. We'll talk to you again soon on this subject, I would have thought. Thanks very much indeed. Let's get some additional perspectives on all of that. Tom Kelly is a former Downing Street official. Lee Reynolds is a former DUP DUP Special Advisor. They've been listening carefully to our debate at the big table tonight. Welcome to both of you, and thanks very much indeed for joining us. Tom, in a way, the last time you were on this programme, you suggested that we might arrive at this point, and perceptive as ever, you were right.
Well, I don't claim great insight. Look, the simple fact of the matter is the UK is broke, and Labour didn't help itself by going along with the Conservatives' election gimmick of cutting national insurance and then ruling out increases in national insurance, income tax and VAT. So that's the bottom line, they're broke. The other factor is that Northern Ireland, frankly, has lost credibility, not just with the Treasury, but with Westminster in general, and is seen to constantly come back with the begging bowl. Now, the Executive, I think, does have a fair argument about you need to invest to save, and you need money to invest to save, and that's a fair argument. And also in terms of the legacy of underfunding, as it now turns out.
Although the government would say it has addressed the issue of that long-term underfunding. It gave an additional £1.5 billion to Northern Ireland in the block grant last autumn. The question is, does the Executive need additional money over and above what it has to pay for transformation, or is the money available within existing budgets to deliver the transformation? Now, everybody agrees. Everybody agrees that the transformation is necessary. The question is the money there to pay for it?
What most of all both sides need is a plan that delivers, if you like, confidence-building measures for both sides, so as that Northern Ireland can demonstrate that it is serious about reform. It is, after all, 8.5 years since the Bungora report. So the Treasury is right to be sceptical about our ability to deliver. But equally, Northern Ireland does need to have that money to invest, if it is, to reform. And that's a fair argument. But above all, there needs to be a proper negotiation, which is what I said the last time I was on.
Yeah.
It needs to be a proper negotiation in which, frankly, good old Northern Ireland honesty perhaps does get in the way.
Does calling the Secretary of State pompous and arrogant help or hinder that process?
The idea that Hilary Benn is pompous, we've had many Secretaries of States to whom that might have applied. I might even have worked for one of them. Hilary Benn is not pompous. Hilary Benn is a decent man trying to do a difficult job at a difficult time. We need to treat him as such and engage with him and engage with the argument, not insult him.
Arrogant, pompous, could you ever apply those labels to Hilary Benn, Lee?
I don't know him particularly well. I can only go by what he said. And in the speech, I would describe it as he was probably more right than he was wrong.
Which might be uncomfortable for some within the Unionist family, and indeed beyond the Unionist family, to hear, because there does seem to be a narrative. We heard it from the 3 of the 4 executive parties at the table tonight who say that Hilary Benn has got this wrong. There does need to be additional funding put in place to be able to deliver transformation. You think the money is there? I
think certainly some of the money is there. As an executive, we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. It's as simple as this. Devolution is good for the small and medium-sized decisions which aren't very difficult. It's bad at the difficult decisions that are medium or big. We're now at the stage where we've long fingered all these and they've all arrived at the same time. So we have to start getting on to deal with them. You point out how there's a negotiation around about increasing the financial floor. I think this is the opening of the negotiation, and the UK government has came out hard. The days of getting something for nothing are over. We need significant and clear plans before we're going to have a credible case to get that fiscal floor
raised. Do you seriously believe that there are negotiations about to take place, or perhaps already taking place, where the British government could be persuaded yet again to put its hand in its pocket, metaphorically, to add additional funds to the Executive's coffers to allow it to do what it knows it needs to do? Do you seriously think that's about to happen?
I think that's possible if the Executive comes forward.
So nothing has changed at all?
No, it's a case of change needs to start with what we have. There are other things that need to be done that I do think we need to raise the fiscal floor for to get through. To do that, to be credible, we need a clear plan. I would describe the extra money we've got over the years with the deals and all the rest of it as the early stages of the Blair years, money wasn't a problem, there you go. Then we had a series of deals where it was money with conditions, but we ducked and we dived and we wheedled out of them. we're no longer, we've ran that road to the end. It's now you can't get something for nothing. We need to be going forward with serious, credible plans of this is how we're going to do the transform the health service. This is when we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do it. This is how much it's going to cost. This is what we're going to do on water infrastructure, and work through these things.
The key word I took from the panel discussion was conditionality. I think any extra money would be conditional on what Leah said, which is there's a proper plan, and that plan is being seen to be carried through. Because the view in the Treasury and elsewhere is that Northern Ireland is a bottomless pit into which you pour money and then you're asked to pour more money and nothing happens.
No.
And that, I think, is the Treasury view. No. And there's evidence for that.
No, to be fair to all the politicians and the political parties, I have serious questions about the capability of our bureaucracy to plan for and deliver transformation. So this isn't just a problem of the political system. I genuinely believe it's a problem of our bureaucratic system as well.
And there's an inquiry going on right now in Stormont based on an audit office report from last year, which was looking at big building projects. It identified £2.5 billion lost in cost overruns between 2019 and 2023. That is a huge amount of money to have been wasted. And you can understand why people would look at that and say, well, you know, are our politicians, are our civil servants actually capable of delivering the kind of transformation that we need whenever we see a loss on that scale?
I would say in defence of Northern Ireland, that's not unique to Northern Ireland when it comes to public sector, but certainly still not an excuse for wasting that type of money.
And that report makes that point. We've seen overruns like that elsewhere. It doesn't make it acceptable.
Yes, absolutely not.
It's about the silo mentality, isn't it, in Northern Ireland?
But that I think is the additional point here. Yes, you need to have proper cost controls, and yes, you need to make sure that the civil service runs properly that way. It's efficient and effective. The bigger issue, I think, for Northern Ireland is the departments act as independent silos rather than synthesis. If you take any of the big infrastructure problems we face, they don't actually sit in one department. They all have implications, and therefore you have to work together.
Right, so we have a system of mandatory coalition government in Northern Ireland, which is bespoke for this place because of the politics that went before. You were in on the ground working for the NIO at the time of the Good Friday Agreement negotiations. Is this now an unintended consequence, this kind of stop-start government, this government which can't quite work, these silos that have developed, are they unintended consequences of a system that was established back in 1998?
Look, the priority in 98, and I make no apology for this, was to cement the peace and get power sharing established and weapons out of our politics. We achieved that. But that's only half the job that we had to try and do, and we didn't do the other half, which was to ensure a method of good government. And I agree with Lee. I think you do have to look at the civil service, because the civil service, in my view, the way it operates in a silo fashion, actually exaggerates that silo mentality rather than providing a central force which actually forces ministers to work more closely together.
Okay, really interesting analysis. My question now, just as we land this conversation, is what happens now? Everybody agrees transformation needs to happen. It's just not clear how and when it's going to happen. If we do end up with a staring contest, briefly, Lee, between Westminster and Stormont, what happens?
If we don't come up with a plan, we lose the staring contest.
Stormont loses the staring contest.
That's my assessment. You know, Rachel Reeves has laid down the law not just to NIO but to every department in terms of future spending. Granted, her national insurance decision has contributed to making that situation worse, but I think that's what we seriously risk. But we should want to change these things. We should want to reform these things. We should want to be ambitious for Northern Ireland. Changing water infrastructure will unlock significant economic potential and prosperity, as well as make a house affordable for people, lower private sector rents, and get people the social house they need.
Right. We're out of time, but it's a really interesting conversation with consequences for all of us. Thanks both very much indeed. That's it for tonight. I'll be back at the weekend with Sunday Politics at the usual time of 10 o'clock on BBC One. Look out for our latest Red Lines discussion on what President Trump's economic approach could mean for both parts of this island. That's on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. For now, though, from everyone on the team, thanks for watching. Good night.